has become a road of death, littered with the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. At just the time this council is calling for the ceasefire that was supposed to take effect Saturday night at midnight, Russia is backing an all-out assault. We do not know how many civilians are left in Debaltseve because Russia and the separatists it supports have refused to guarantee the safety of impartial OSCE monitors who've been trying for days to enter the area, a commitment that in this upside-down world, Russia and the separatists made on February 12th at Minsk. But we know from credible press reports that thousands of civilians in Debaltseve and neighboring villages have been sheltering from heavy shelling in dank basements, often without running water, food, electricity, or basic medical supplies. We know that many of the civilians left who are enduring the terror of this relentless assault are the elderly and small children, people who could not evacuate on their own. And even with such limited information, we know with certainty that at the same time that Russia signs on to yet another agreement committing itself to de-escalation and peace, forces that Russia trains, equips, and joins on the battlefield have only escalated this fighting, grabbing more territory and killing the Ukrainian soldiers who stand in their way. We are caught in a deadly feedback loop. International leaders engage in rigorous, exhaustive negotiations to get Russia to commit to peace in Geneva, in Normandy, in September in Minsk, in Berlin in February, and then again in Minsk on February 12th when the implementations were signed, and now in New York. Yet Russia's commitments have no bearing on the actions of its soldiers and the separatists they back on the ground. Mr. President, the United States has maintained the same position across 30 meetings before this council with respect to Ukraine. Let me reiterate that position. We are for peace in Ukraine. We are for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and unity. We are for ending the violence in eastern Ukraine that has taken more than 5,600 lives since last April and displaced already approximately 1 million people. We are for all of the signatories to the agreements signed in Minsk in September 2014, particularly Russia and the separatists they back, fulfilling the commitments that they have made. And we are for the package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements of September 5 and September 19th, the package of measures endorsed last week by the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Germany, and France. To be clear, the February 12th implementation package is a roadmap to fulfilling commitments made by these same signatories in the September Minsk agreements. President Hollande, President Poroshenko, Chancellor Merkel, and President Putin each made this clear when they endorsed the implementation package on February 12th and issued their joint declaration that they, quote, remain committed to the implementation of the Minsk agreements, end quote. The Minsk agreements, in the title, plural, refer to those signed on September 5 and September 19th by the same signatories, while the measures for implementation, in the title, make clear that the February 12th package was designed to begin carrying out the September agreements and not to supplant them, as Russia has now begun to argue. The United States rejects any interpretation of this resolution that would abrogate the parties' earlier commitments. All parties must implement all of the commitments made in the September Minsk agreements. The implementation steps agreed upon in the February 12th package include a comprehensive ceasefire, the withdrawal of heavy weapons from the September line of contact, the release of all hostages, and the eventual restoration of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and control of its international border. Too often, debates in this council occur in a vacuum, removed from the real world. In the real world, a man named Alexei Kravchenko, a 73-year-old in the Ukrainian-held town of Svitlodarsk, near Debaltseve, recently told a reporter that he had spent nights huddled together with his grandchildren in a bomb shelter on his property as shelling continued through the night. Alexei told the reporter that his grandchildren said to him in the shelter, "Grandpa, I don't want to die young." He said, "I held my grandchildren and they were shaking, and I looked in their eyes and they were afraid." With the February 12th agreement, Alexei said, now we are hoping. The fighting, unfortunately, has in fact increased dramatically near Alexei's home. But we call on Russia to translate hope into real action, to translate hope into real results, and to do so urgently. Today's council session is an effort to throw the council's weight behind an agreement already jeopardized by statements by the separatists dismissing the full ceasefire, by their continued attacks on Debaltseve and by the separatists' refusal, together with Russia's, to allow access to the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. We are looking to Russia, which manufactured and fueled this conflict, to leave the upside-down world it has created and to honor the resolution it tabled today supporting efforts to end it. Thank you.
感谢美国代表的发言。
Mr. President, thank you very much for the opportunity to address the Security Council. Let me start with our thanks to you, Mr. President, personally, and members of the Security Council for your today's strong statement on the situation in Debaltseve. I will speak on that issue later. We are grateful to the members of the Security Council for your continuous support of Minsk process since the first agreements on peaceful settlement were adopted on September 5 and 19. Ukraine welcomes your support for recent agreements of 12th of February, which don't substitute but reinforce those adopted last September. Mr. President, Russian side quite obviously positions itself as a devoted proponent of the peace process and a guarantor of the effective implementation of the Minsk agreements. It even suggested the resolution that has just been adopted. Yet this is on paper. What happens in reality is quite opposite. Mr. President, Ukraine has demonstrated a responsible attitude to the fulfillment of undertaken international obligations. The arrangement on ensuring the ceasefire regime starting from February 15 has been fulfilled, as stipulated in documents adopted in Minsk and in the normative format with participation of the President of Ukraine, France, Russia, and Chancellor of Germany. The withdrawal of heavy weaponry after ensuring the unconditional, comprehensive, and sustainable ceasefire with the assistance and monitoring of the OSCE and the support of the Trilateral Contact Group was to become the next step. Unfortunately, despite hopes for the responsible position of all the parties which adopted the declaration in support of the complex of measures on the fulfillment of the Minsk agreements on February 12, and the signatories to the given complex of measures, including the Russian Federation and so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic, the agreements are not complied with. The hope for peace is being virtually ruined. Instead, at the moment, there are attempts to return everyone to war and escalation of the situation. Yesterday, after the negotiations in the telephone mode with President of Russia, Chancellor of Germany, and President of France, it was agreed to hold negotiations at the level of the representatives of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the General Staff of Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, and representatives of Lugansk and Donetsk. Negotiations were held today in the morning in the form of video conference. Unblocking the access of the OSCE mission to Debaltseve was to become the result of these negotiations. The Russian party has blocked the given opportunity. Militants controlled by it have declared the continuation of offensive operations, flagrantly violating all the previous arrangements and the entire package of the Minsk agreements. From midnight of February 15 till this morning, the Ukrainian positions were shelled over 160 times, and not with small arms, but with mortars, artillery systems, rocket systems, and tanks. 11 servicemen have been killed and 36 wounded as a result of these attacks of the terrorists. Yet the Ukrainian military have kept arms silent unless they were under direct attack. The very first day of the ceasefire, the Russian side illegally brought the 14th so-called humanitarian convoy to the east of Ukraine. This was done, as before, without consent of Ukrainian side and without activating an international mechanism that the February 12 arrangements clearly envisage. I even do not mention that the number of trucks as well as their contents did not match what was declared in the documents. I think it will not be a surprise to all of you to hear that heavy weapons and equipment is continuously shipped to the east of Ukraine. Today, at least 12 armored vehicles and 54 trucks with ammunition broke into Ukraine through the Izvarene border checkpoint that Ukrainian government currently does not control. The situation in Debaltseve is incredibly tense. The militants, again with the support of Russian forces and heavy weapons, incessantly and violently attack Ukrainian positions in and around the town. Taking advantage that the Ukrainian military refrain from actions in line with the ceasefire, the militants and Russian forces did their best to surround the town. The militants' ringleader blatantly threatened to kill every defender of Debaltseve unless they lay down weapons and threatened to move on westward and seize also the city of Kharkiv. Civilians are falling victims of indiscreet shelling of the town by the terrorists too. Basically, the cruel assault on Debaltseve as well as many other locations ridicules the ceasefire concept and undermines the very essence of the peace process. With this picture in mind, we call on the countries participants of the Minsk negotiations, Germany, France, Russia, to make every possible effort to ensure the fulfillment of the Minsk plan based on the Minsk Protocol of September 5, the Minsk Memorandum of September 19, and the documents adopted on February 12 in Minsk. We address countries of the United Nations membership with a demand to express a decisive protest against the blockade of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission work. We also call on the permanent members of the UN Security Council to prevent further violation of fundamental principles and rules of the United Nations and the unleashing of the full-scale warfare in the very center of Europe. To become a real contributor to the peaceful settlement of the conflict, the Russian Federation needs to withdraw all its armed forces from the territory of Ukraine and to secure the Russian-Ukrainian border, as well as to force Russian-backed separatists to fulfill the provisions of Minsk agreements. A chance for peace must be used. It is only unity of the entire civilized world and solidarity with Ukraine that gives hope for the restoration of peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
感谢乌克兰代表的发言。我现在请德国代表发言。
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany welcomes the resolution just adopted by the Security Council endorsing the February 12th package of measures for implementation of the Minsk agreements of September 2014. The Security Council thus sends a clear signal that it is ready to assume its responsibility at this crucial juncture of the conflict in and around Ukraine to ensure the comprehensive implementation of the package of measures for implementation of the Minsk Protocol of 5 September and the Minsk Memorandum of 19 September 2014 that remain in their entirety the unalterable legal and political basis for the conflict settlement process. We hope that the endorsement of the Minsk agreements by the Council will have a strong stabilizing effect on the situation on the ground and contribute to the strict and full implementation of the ceasefire and to the following political process. So far, according to the current reporting by the OSCE, the ceasefire has been mostly holding, with the most deplorable exception of Debaltseve, as outlined in the Council's press statement. The continuing attacks threaten not only the ceasefire, they also undermine the political settlement process as agreed upon in the framework of the Trilateral Contact Group and as endorsed by the Normandy heads of state and government in Minsk. Against this background, today's Security Council resolution is of utmost importance. The resolution conveys a stern message to those who violate the ceasefire. These ceasefire spoilers must know they oppose the resolve of the international community. Germany reiterates its commitment to the sovereignty, political independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders in accordance with General Assembly Resolution A68-262 on the situation in Ukraine. I would also like to reiterate again our condemnation of the illegal annexation of Crimea that we will not recognize. It is our clear understanding that also in the context of this resolution, territorial integrity of Ukraine means territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you, Mr. President.
感谢德国代表的发言。
I thank the representative
俄
of
罗斯
Germany
联邦
for
代
his
表
statement.
要求再次发言。
The representative
我现在
of
请
the
他
Russian
发言。
Federation asked for the floor again. Now I give him the floor.
Thank you, President. I'd like to say a few words. We had hoped that the unanimous adoption of the resolution today and today's discussion in the Council, the first since reaching the Minsk agreements of 19 September, would send a unifying signal, pave the way for a more harmonious work in the Council than before on the issue of the Ukraine crisis. Our hopes came partly true. We continue to hope that the clear, short resolution will gear the parties towards implementing the decisions that were adopted in Minsk. We were disappointed by the discussion, though, because some colleagues decided to start off with their usual rhetoric, and often that rhetoric was often offensive. In particular, offensive was the attempts to rewrite the Minsk agreements in these conditions. Some delegations started picking out certain parts of the agreement and saying how really the Minsk agreements look. The situation now is very simple. We need to look at the resolution, the provisions in the resolution, and implement the adopted document in due fashion. Nor can I want to pick up on the figurative expression that Madam Power used about an upside-down world. To listen to her statement, I couldn't help the talk of the upside-down world stuck out. She accused Russia of starting the crisis, but did we topple the illegally elected president throughout all these events that took place in Ukraine a year ago? Russia kept calling for a bloodless political solution. We supported the 21st February agreement. We insisted on its implementation even after the lawfully elected president had been toppled. We supported the April communique on 17th April that calling for constitutional dialogue. We supported the initiative of the OSCE chair. What was the impetus for the armed conflict that we are seeing? The impetus was the support by certain Western countries of the decision of the Kiev leadership to militarily suppress, using force, the dissatisfaction of the people in the east. They set fire to them in Odessa, burnt them alive in Mariupol, they shot them, and in Donbass they launched a military operation, they started to send the heavy guns in. And so what's war? War is when you have an attack, and when you have a war, you have an attack, you have defense. That's what we're seeing in recent times. That's what happened in Debaltseve. Kiev could have acted nobly when they agreed on the 21st February agreement. They could have allowed their soldiers to save their lives, those who were encircled in Debaltseve. First they denied there was an encirclement, then they started issuing orders, banning them, not allowing them to put down their weapons. There are certain rules of the game. With heavy military equipment in a circle, you can't let heavy equipment out of a circle. So this regrouping that we're seeing of what we're seeing is a regrouping of the Ukrainian armed forces that took place after the 19th of September agreements in Minsk. So such a courageous decision by the Ukrainian authorities could have saved the lives of civilians. Instead, Kiev preferred to get carried away by all the patriotic rhetoric and calling for actions which have had the most tragic consequences. Now, Madam Power spoke of the difficult situation for civilians in Debaltseve. Now, what about the citizens in Debaltseve who couldn't leave the city? One's heart bleeds for them. But you think the people in Donetsk, is better? For months, the Ukrainian security forces have been shelling Donetsk, but no one seemed too bothered about that. There are many other villages and towns that have been razed to the ground as a result of the actions of the Ukrainian security forces. Why did no one say anything about those in the West? We've been flagging this the whole time, but for some reason there's been no reaction from our Western colleagues. Just because the shelling of towns have continued, that's why the Minsk agreements of September weren't upheld as we initially hoped for. So really the OSCE, the observers need to do their work, including in around Debaltseve, but safe conditions need to be established for that. We all recall that these are unarmed, we know they're unarmed people, they are in armoured cars, yes, but without certain minimum safe security conditions, they can't effectively control or monitor anything. Now, to be honest, I'm rather surprised that today the Ukrainian colleague returned to the theme of humanitarian convoys on the 14th. That convoy have saved hundreds of civilian lives in the Donbass and Lugansk. In conditions of shelling, in fact, in the conditions of effective blockade that was established by the Ukrainian authorities against the people in Donetsk and Lugansk. We've always asked you to cooperate us with an organising the convoys. Each and every time you've refused to cooperate, the whole time you've refused to allow the Ukrainian custom peoples to examine the convoys. So you need to help us save people's lives. People need to get through the winter. We've been doing this, and we're very satisfied, pleased with the assistance we've been able to offer. Some colleagues mentioned, two colleagues mentioned Crimea. In one word to all these statements about Crimea, one figure. That figure is 93. Recently, the German agency that studies public opinion conducted a poll among Crimean residents, came to the conclusion that 93% of people in the Crimea supported unification with Russia. 82% said this categorically, 11% said they would prefer, 4% were against. That's even slightly more than the figure that we had in the referendum in favor of unification with Russia. Now, the territorial integrity, yes, territorial integrity, today's resolution, the Security Council adopted the resolution confirming the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and it did so in February 2015.
感谢俄罗斯联邦代表的发言。发言名单上没有其他人了。美国代表要求再次发言，我现在请他发言。
I'll be very brief, Mr. President. I just want to be clear in response to my Russian colleague that the United States wholeheartedly welcomes this agreement. We will do all we can to support it. But if Russia is committed to peace, it doesn't need a UN Security Council resolution to prove it. There are actually easier ways to prove it. You could stop arming the separatists, stop sending hundreds of heavy weapons across the border in addition to your troops, stop pretending you are not doing what you are doing, and start calling on and insisting upon the separatists observing the ceasefire around Debaltseve. So resolution or no resolution, what matters is fulfilling the commitments that have been made now multiple times. And I assure you that we will be the first to notice and to take notice, and it will actually be very easy to see whether or not these commitments are being met.
I thank the representative of the U.S. for her statement.
俄罗斯联邦代表要求再次发言。
And the representative of Russian Federation asked for the floor again. Please.
Штаты не собираются препятствовать реализации минских договоренностей. Что касается слов по поводу России, повторяющих некоторые
words about Russia repeating some previous arguments. We're not pretending anything. We're not pretending.
Мы предлагали определенные курс
We
действий, нас не
proposed a
послушали,
certain
мы
course of action. No one listened to us. We warned about the
последствия вот
consequences.
таковы.
Sadly, those
Но
consequences are as
для нас
they
это
have
все
been.
находится на
For
наших
us,
границах.
this is all happening on our borders. We made our choice. It's set out in the Minsk agreements, and I do hope that those agreements will be duly delivered on. So and hopefully that Ukraine peace can be restored, and that the social consensus that in that country that's not existed for such a long time, that country, not even before the last year when the president was toppled, for many years that we haven't had any of that social consensus. That's what we need to work on, which the Kiev for some reason hasn't wanted to do. So you see the disgust of the new national holiday that they declared, the date of when they created the new collaboration pro-Nazi army, they declared that, but that just caused disgust. They said nothing about creating a new constitution. That's a genuine pity. That's what Russia has always warned about. So let's look at the situation clearly and objectively. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. The representative of Ukraine has asked for the floor again. Now I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. With your permission, I will touch upon some questions and will raise them in the Russian language. То, что сегодня было названо воссоединением Крыма,
what was called the unification of Crimea. This is called really occupation, annexation following an aggression attack. Full stop. We'll discuss this further. What was said about humanitarian convoys, it's a challenge to international law that defines arrangements for supplies of humanitarian assistance to a second country. In today's statement, once again, in the Russian statement, again, it was international law again, was once again trampled all over. They have their law. I don't know how they're using it. I don't know. As to the Constitution, what we're rejecting and what Russia is constantly trying to interfere in is they're trying to tell us how we should develop, what our constitutional order should be, what the next constitution should look like. Everything was clearly stated to our people regarding to the eastern regions, not just the eastern regions. Work is underway on decentralization, expansion of the powers of local authorities. Therefore, once again, I ask you, at least in this chamber, don't interfere in our affairs. We'll decide ourselves how to live, what to build, and how to establish dialogue with our own people. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine. The Russian Federation has asked for another time to the floor.
Thank you. You need to find dialogue. Well, find that dialogue then in the end. Find the dialogue. You can't establish that dialogue. You're unable. That's why that we keep saying, let's establish that dialogue with the people in the East, but you say we're interfering. They're asking us, what do the Eastern people in the East want? We say that people in the East want federalization. So go and find that dialogue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation. The representative of Lithuania asked for the floor.
Last one. Oh, yes. There is a pattern in this repeated taking the floor 3 or 4 times. And we rarely do that, but a couple of comments. One, it's not easy to work on constitution for any country, be it Ukraine or any other country, in conflict at gunpoint, where the so-called self-defenders, and that's how Russia has consistently referred to the militants, illegal bands of militants, criminals, who are better armed than a good part of European armies. I mean, Lithuania has no tanks, not a single one. Estonia, Latvia, so many other countries in Europe have not a single tank. How come there are hundreds of tanks in the hands of the militants? There are hundreds of tornadoes, howitzers, whatever it is. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, these things don't drop out of the sky, so somebody's supplying them. And looking at the geography, these things can come only from one direction, where the borders are completely porous and away from the international eyes. And therefore, we do believe, and in our national capacity, we've been telling, and we will continue telling Ukraine that they have to continue with the reforms, that they have to combat corruption, they have to do a lot of things so that restore that trust which had been lost over the decades prior to this government. But it is very difficult to take care of constitution when guns are being pointed at your head. The other thing which struck me was basically a phrase about how Kiev could have nobly allowed the troops to leave and capitulated. I wonder how many countries in this room, present here, would be happy to capitulate their own city surrounded by illegal militants, by bandits, by insurgents, whoever they are, away from whatever ceasefire zones. Just give up part of your territory and leave nobly. I think it's very cynical to talk about noble potential of Kiev authorities to have left, to have taken the soldiers out, and Kiev missing that opportunity. It's their territory, and they are defending their territory. That territory is away from any ceasefire agreement, from Minsk I, from Minsk II. It's their own territory, and I think any country sitting at this table would do exactly the same. Any country sitting here would defend our own territory to the last. And Kiev is no exception.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for her statement. The representative of Russian Federation asks for the floor again, please.
I'd very much like to leave the last word to my Lithuanian colleague. I'd love it if I could, but I'm probably abusing my speaking time. But after what she said, I can't help but respond with a couple of words. Capitulating one's territory. Now, have you read the meaning of the whole Minsk agreements, everything that we're talking about? We're talking about reintegration of Ukraine, reintegration. Now, how significant is it where that line is drawn in those conditions? In the recent months, the problem was that the Ukrainian security forces had been shelling towns. So we wanted to be pushed away from Donetsk so that they couldn't shell the cities. But this bloodshed if Ukrainian is going to be reintegrated, you want to draw a new state line? Okay, well, let's draw a new state line. And we can have a look at that issue. Now, turning us to weapons, Lithuania, I think, is the only state to which sincerely, officially says that it's supplying weapons to Kiev. So perhaps, maybe the militia's getting some, maybe the militia could get some of those Lithuanian weapons. Thank you.
I thank the Russian Federation for his statement.
Our
meeting is not an open debate today. With that,
given that, I mean, we have a tiny army and very small reserves of weapons, it is not exactly right to suggest that Lithuania is providing armaments to Ukraine. And even if we did provide medical assistance, we've taken wounded Ukrainian soldiers into Lithuanian hospitals, that is true. This has nothing to do with all the heavy weaponry that has been provided. We know from which side. So let's not compare forces, because Lithuanian forces, and we can come back to statistics next time, certainly have nothing to do. And even if we did provide some armaments, that would be such a drop in the ocean. That wouldn't make a difference.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for her statement. And the representative of Ukraine has asked for the floor again, please.
Sorry, Mr. President, but what sounded from our colleagues, this is unacceptable, because our leaders met in Minsk. They made very clear statements. They supported very clear provisions. And we can't agree with such interpretation of the Minsk agreements as it was sounded from the Russian side. I am so sorry, but we are here not to create Minsk III and to bring our interpretations to what our leaders agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank Russian Federation.
Членов Совета Безопасности. Уймите членов Совета Безопасности. Уймите членов Совета. Они продолжают меня провоцировать.
We're not interpreting anything. We're taking the Minsk agreements. We're interpreting it letter by word for word, and we think everyone should read that document word for word and implement it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting is adjourned.